Welcome to the Truth of the Public Square podcast, a podcast dedicated to equipping Christians to engage culture and politics for the glory of God and the common good. I'm your host, Harrison Lang, and on today's podcast, I am joined by Pastor Erik Reed to discuss Christianity and artificial intelligence. Erik is the founder and lead pastor of the Journey Church in Lebanon, Tennessee. Additionally, he is part of the Bully Pulpit podcast. Erik, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for inviting me on. Excited to be a part of this and glad you're doing a show like this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. As we like to begin this episode, I would just love to hear and update our audience just about your current season of life in ministry, what's going on at your church in Tennessee, and this more about you.
Yeah, so I am born and raised in Lebanon, Tennessee, and the only time I was not here is when I was in the Army, when I was 18 years old, and spent 4 years in the military. I was a paratrooper, 82nd Airborne in the Army. Came back, got a full-time job, and was serving in my church, married my now wife of 20 plus years, and thought I'd be kind of doing that for the rest of my life. And then within a year or two, I really started to feel a call toward ministry, and started helping and serving in our church. Started as an intern, moved up to an interim in a spot they were needing a person for, and within a few years, I was 24 years old, and somebody said, "Hey, you ought to consider planting a church." And so I planted a church in my hometown. Within a couple years of that, I was 25 years old, and we started the church, and that was 20 years ago. We actually celebrated our 20-year anniversary in January. January of 2026 equals 20 years. So, honestly, here's I never would have scripted this. Never would have thought I'm going to be a pastor one day, and I'm going to be in my hometown. Honestly, thought I'd never stay in my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the Lord had other plans. He changed my affections and desires to put roots down, have a family. And then, honestly, the more I drew closer in my own walk with Him, the more I started to recognize the gaping hole in our culture, even a Bible Belt culture, of folks who were biblically literate and who knew how to walk out their faith. There was a lot of genuine Christians, people who, confess Christ, love the Lord. They don't have any idea of how that played out in their everyday lives, and discipleship was, missing in most cases, in most churches. And honestly, the church was just not equipped even to help people deal with cultural issues. Like the church just locally felt completely out of touch with what people were dealing with in their lives. And so I ended up planting a church, and it's been a pretty wild ride. Coming up on 20 years, we've grown to over 2,000 people in attendance, which again, is just slowly but steady. It wasn't like some big massive spike of growth. We've just continued to reach people and disciple people, and our area continues to be a hotbed for transplants from California and other liberal cities and states around the country. People are fleeing their communist overlord states and coming to the land of the free here in Tennessee.
Well, praise God. Well, praise God for your faithful witness and your just faithful ministry over the past 20 years at your local church and also in your hometown. I'm sure it's been interesting to, evangelize and disciple either your friends from high school and middle school or their kids, or baptizing their kids, or even ministering to their parents. That who would have thought that this young man would have become pastor one day. It's always something interesting to kind of reflect on. I don't come from a Christian household, and so when the Lord saved me at the end of high school, and then I now go talk to my old high school buddies, it's just completely different. It's like as if we've never had a prior relationship, just because the Lord has transformed our hearts. So just praise the Lord for that. As you mentioned that, I would love to hear, how have you been shaped in your ministry to equip the church to think about cultural and political engagement? Obviously, over the past few years, there's been the last 10 years of your church's ministry have been a hotbed for political discussions within the church, more than it's probably been in a while. So just how do you equip your people? How have you got interested in kind of that topic?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, because I was in the Army, I didn't, go to high school and go to college, go to seminary. I had no college when I got out of the Army. And so when I felt that call to ministry, a pastor that I had told me like, "Well, you need to go to seminary." And I'm like, "Sure. Where do I sign up for seminary?" And he said, "Well, where'd you go to college?" I was like, "I haven't gone to college." And he's like, "Well, you're going to have to start there." So I actually started, granted, I was already married, and by this time we're starting to have children. And so I was staying rooted locally. And so I went to a community college there for 2 years. And then after the community college, I started driving to a 4-year university that was, an hour and 15 minutes away, and got my degree there. And then I started seminary. But here's what's interesting. One of my professors, that was my undergraduate professor, he said, since you're like in ministry, you ought to go to seminary in Nashville. Since you live there, you ought to go to Vanderbilt Divinity. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, wow, Vanderbilt, it's a big prestigious school. And of course, I had no idea about just seminaries and the liberalism and progressivism. And my perception of like a Southern seminary where I ended up eventually graduating was that it was like the Baptist fundamentalist school. You know what I mean? Like I thought it would just be like Sunday school on steroids, and for whatever reason, I had that perception. So I was like, yeah, I want a good challenge. I want to be academically challenged. And so I went to Vanderbilt Divinity. This would have been in 2008. This would have been 2008. And I mean, honestly, Harrison was blown away by how liberal and progressive it was. And it was faith on trial every day. I was pastoring at this point. We planted the church in 2006, January of 2006. I'm now at this seminary that doesn't believe, most of the Bible is authentically the Word of God. Jesus was a construction of lots of editors, and you can't trust anything he said unless it has something to do with some of the socialist, progressive talking points that they want to appeal to in that moment. And, homosexuality was celebrated. They literally had coming out parties every Friday night where they'd get together and people would tell their coming out story. And CRT, critical race theory, was being taught in the school as just the air you breathe, like just second nature, right? It was just, that's what it was. It wasn't like, okay, now we're going to teach you something here. And I was just imbibing this stuff, but my immune system was strong enough that I was rejecting it. Yet it was like, it was a fight constantly.
Mhm.
And what was really interesting at that time, Harrison, is you got to think 2008 to 2009. I'm in this place where when I walked on campus, I was walking into a bubble that for the most part did not exist outside of that campus in most of cultural context. Most of my interaction with people online or just in day-to-day activities, they weren't living out CRT. They weren't pro same-sex marriage. That stuff would come years later. But I was indoctrinated. I was living in that at Vanderbilt. And I eventually just said, I can't stay here. Like, I'm not getting a positive education in terms of like, I'm not building anything constructive. The way I used to tell people is I feel like I'm rejecting the lumber and materials that they're trying to build on my foundation. And after a year and a half of doing that, I'm pretty clear on what I don't want. But the problem is I'm a year and a half later and it's still just a slab and I've got nothing built on it because I've just kept rejecting everything. And so that's when I finally signed up to go to Southern Seminary. They had an extension center. I was blown away by how serious they took theological study and philosophical study and apologetics and all the things. They were far more honest than Vanderbilt was about opponents' views, things like that. But it was a refuge for me, and I was finally growing theologically. I was, developing and these spiritual heroes and these new people to look up to. And I'm saying all that to say this: around this time, Harrison, this is where the new atheist movement began to really rise and come to prominence. This is the Christopher Hitchens, the Dawkins, the Sam Harrises. Those people are starting to make headway, and they're making headway in the culture because now you've got new tools like social media and YouTube. And so these ideas that had kind of lived in universities and kind of in these elite institutions and circles are now spilling out into the culture and society at large through these new mediums of social media and YouTube and things of that nature. So now all of a sudden, I'm finding myself as a pastor having to engage with their arguments because they're becoming more prominent. People like Dan Brown's writing books called The Da Vinci Code that's questioning whether or not Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and having children, and it was all being hidden by the church. And believe it or not, like, I'm having to help our people process wild ideas that they're starting to hear because of the way that these things are now being disseminated. So you go through that period, and then we go through this massively tumultuous time. Starting really, I would argue in 2014, the Trayvon Martin shooting, followed by the Michael Brown shooting in 2015, led to this real, I mean, prominent kind of taking over culturally of this narrative of police brutality and racism started kind of really coming back into prominence in terms of like everything was racial, oppressor oppressive worldview, the intersectionality, all of this stuff was starting to come up. And I was like, hold on a second. I've seen this all before. I've heard all of this. Uh, this was Vanderbilt. Like I had lived in the hallways and in the classrooms having these discussions. And so I was immediately like, hold on a minute, guys. Hold on a minute. Don't just take this in. Don't just listen to this. You're not a racist, simply because you're a white Christian male, right? You're not a racist or an oppressor simply because you got this job and somebody over here that's a different color didn't get that job. It doesn't have to be race dependent. And here's where it really kind of like went off the rails. Around that same time, you've got Obergefell gets passed. In 2015, the Obergefell case comes down. Same-sex marriage is made, the law of the land in the United States. Now you got Christians talking about not just same-sex marriage, but all things sexuality. That's the big debate happening in the church. You quickly move to the transgender issues. While that's all going on, you've got the critical race theory, the police, the conversation going on. All of this was stuff that I was dealing with at Vanderbilt in 2008 and 2009. And I thought it would just live in those halls, in those classrooms, and never spill out into the streets and into church conversations. And now all of a sudden, it has. And so I feel like I was genuinely equipped because of my experience at Vanderbilt to speak to these issues and recognize the issues, to recognize the root behind what people were hearing and saying, and Black Lives Matter coming onto the scene. Like I was able to point it out. And so I would just say, long answer, but there's a lot of context behind it. I would say starting in 2010, that with the new atheist movement, and to this very day, it's been a nonstop kind of wave after wave of issues that have emerged that have forced Christians to speak to the issues that are threatening to disciple their people in a particular direction if they didn't.
Amen on that. That is so true. In, when it comes to these political and philosophical issues, they bear so much on everyday life, more
Every
than
day.
we used to kind of just take for granted. Because I think generally both sides of the aisles would have a lot of agreements among the common people. Of course, you got the academics who have had their own discussions for the past 100 plus years on some issues, and of course, there've been some issues that have been a little tumultuous over time. But usually it's been a fairly united on the frankly on common sense among the political landscape of the common people in the United States. But over the past 10 or so years, that's completely changed. And so,
Completely shifted.
as you've mentioned, with the in 2014 with the Black Lives Matter protest and both of those circumstances are tragedies. When anybody
Yeah,
loses their life,
absolutely.
that's a sad thing that we should remorse over whether or not it's justified or not. We should still have remorse for everyone involved. Um, I came at it actually at a different time, and so not to
Yeah.
make you feel I was like 13 when it happened, and
Yeah,
so,
no, you can go
uh
ahead and say it. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm
So,
old.
I was, a teenager, middle school, and I sort of wrestling with these things because, obviously I grew up in a suburban house, fairly, not well off family, but in a family that had generally had her needs met, and was in one of the best school districts in the state of Missouri, and all that came to, I didn't know how to process all this stuff going on in the culture. And so, interesting story, I was not a professing believer at this point. Or I was not a believer. I professed faith in Christ, but it didn't really mean anything. But what I ultimately became early on in high school was I became more of like a de facto socialist because that's what it, honestly, it's what my teachers were teaching in some
Yeah,
way or another.
it was
You
the air
basically,
you were breathing.
yeah, and so I was like, hey, like if you're they probably didn't say cisgender at that point, but in 2015, but they did say like, hey, you're a white man, you. I remember the story, and this is just like I had teachers and fellow students and I in 2012. This is a couple years before this. That I said I wanted Mitt Romney to, be president. Because at this time, we actually have like schools that like, little mock elections or whatever, who would win. And I mean, they probably don't do that anymore. It'd be too hot button of issue now. But, in 2012, we did that. And I, said I wanted to talk amongst some basketball and baseball friends and said, I want, Mitt Romney because that's what my parents wanted. I don't really know anything, and it's like, oh, you just don't want Obama because he's a black man.
Right.
And whether
Yep.
I had justified reasons to like Mitt Romney because I really didn't. My parents wanted me to, at 12 years old. Um, but that's just the cultural landscape that people are being raised in, and so as we are evangelizing, discipling people in the church, so as we're trying to reach people in our local neighborhoods, we need to know where are they coming from a worldview standpoint, and be able to compare it to the worldview of Christ and the Christian worldview, and to see why the Christian worldview is superior. And to do that, you need to know their worldview to be able to not just straw man their worldview.
That's
And
right.
so I'd say,
Harrison, you mentioned too, I mean, this is, I think, a really good point. You mentioned that, there was a time where politics agreed on, the first tier issues,
mhm,
that they agreed on basic common grace, natural law issues, and where policy began to differentiate from each other, we're on the tertiary issues of, how big the government should be or how much money should be dedicated to infrastructure or to foreign policy or military defense and, those kinds of things. So like Democrats believe this and Republicans believe that. And what's happened over the years, and it parallel tracks with the shifts in the culture. The politics shifted as the culture shifted. And so you think about what was happening in 2015, where there were two things that happened simultaneously. Not only is Obama at the end of his 8 years and the complete kind of like liberalization of the culture is in motion. He had flipped on same-sex marriage.
mhm,
Obergefell comes down. And as Obergefell's coming down in 2015, guess who's coming down escalators at the same time in Trump Towers in New York? It's Donald J. Trump saying, I'm going to run for president. And that begins a whole nother, wave of how should Christians think about politics and politicians. And Trump begins to give voice to a lot of the things that people were feeling on the ground. They felt marginalized, they felt attacked for no reason other than you're white or you're conservative or you're middle class or whatever, and they felt forgotten, they felt stepped on, and he gave voice to them and said, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight against these politicians who say one thing to you and do the opposite. And all of a sudden this groundswell of support comes for Trump, and you got that going on and debates happening within Christians of should we vote for a man who is not the prototypical politician, who, by the way, the prototypical politician isn't some, moral exemplar. They're just somebody who's learned to polish their presentation
mhm,
to everybody publicly. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean,
mhm,
John F. Kennedy, is notorious for the affairs that he had on his wife, but his public persona was very polished. And these are all things that come out after the fact about him because they were supposed to keep it low key. So all of a sudden, Christians are having these debates like, can we vote for a guy like this? And it's like, a guy like what? A guy that's going to be the president or your pastor? I wouldn't vote for him to be my pastor, but that's not the job he's running for. And I want to listen to what he wants to do for the job. So politics changed.
Mm.
Politics moved away from the things that, were debates about, roads and, how much money should be dedicated towards education and blah, 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 blah. And now all of a sudden we're debating over the nature of sexuality and the nature of a man and a woman. And all of a sudden politics has become theology. And when politics become theology, then your theologians are de facto talking about things that have become politics. And I think a lot of pastors immediately started to silence their voices because they have been told for so long, you don't want to get into politics.
Mhm.
But I think that warning not only is wrong on the face of it, but in the particular context that we live in, it was wrong to say you need to stay out of politics when the politics themselves were getting into the issues that are our issues.
Mhm.
They're our issues. They're theological, they're spiritual in nature. And so when we talk about, can a man become a woman and can a man get pregnant and should two men be able to adopt a baby and should a man be able to change in a girl's locker room, all these are conversations about the nature of what is a man and what is a woman. This is anthropology. Biblical anthropology, by the way, is the issue of our lifetimes. Every single major political issue touches biblical anthropology, from abortion to IVF to the transgender conversation to Obergefell and same-sex marriage. All of it, our birth rate decline, all the issues we deal with are anthropology issues.
No, that's just hitting the nail right on the head there. One thing that I do want to move on to in a second to artificial intelligence, but one last thing I do want to say when it comes to just involving church and politics, what does that look like for churches and pastors? Um, the first thing I think about is think about the disenchanted 25 and younger, most likely a male.
Mhm.
Who are they most likely being influenced by today? Nick Fuentes. And this is someone who is, if you think Trump was bad on his language, back like in 2005, whatever when the tape's from, Nick Fuentes has some serious, issues there, and he's influencing even young Christian men,
That's right.
and so. And if our pastors, if the church is not equipping young adults to understand politics and how can they get involved if they want to be involved in politics and have
Yeah.
those discussions, they're gonna do that anyways. And so
Yes.
what's a better place for them to get equipped to think through these things than the local church
That's
and
right.
through their local church pastor? And so that's why I think it's so vital that pastors need to know cultural and political issues are important for the day
Yes.
because in some way or another they become gospel issues. And so it's not saying that hey, your physical policy, your social policy is gonna become a first year theological issue, not saying that, but when it comes to, as you said, biblical anthropology, that's becoming a first tier issue. That if someone's, I think I heard from, I think you all of you talked about on the podcast recently, but when Jonathan Lehman kind of recanted from his statements on a Christian voting for, a Democrat, those are,
That's right.
people are wrestling with that because, I give a lot more leeway when it comes to local elections, because, maybe if, I mean, as an example, still know what I would do in this situation. But a couple years ago, we had um, in Kansas, the governor race had a pretty like immoral and corrupt Republican governor running for office, and had a Democrat opponent, and she ended up winning in a pretty red state because of the failures of the prior administration.
Right.
And obviously, that became like where she's won the she's helped Kansas kind of be a big proponent of abortion and
Oh
so
yeah.
forth. And so that's been obviously one that's really tragic. But I mean, these are discussions I think Christians need to get involved in. And
Yep.
so just thank you for everything you said there. Uh, for the remainder of this episode, I would love to have a conversation about the future of artificial intelligence and how Christians should view artificial intelligence. So, I guess my first question for you is, why should Christians have these important conversations about the role of AI in our lives and communities?
Yeah. So, theologically, my starting point is that every single aspect of life should be lived under the lordship of Christ. We are not Gnostics. We do not separate out our spiritual lives from our physical lives. We don't separate out church and devotionals in the morning from parenting, from vocation, from politics. We don't live divided. We have a unified worldview and vision for life that seeks to live every sphere of our lives to the glory of God. That includes the technology that we adopt and use. It includes, how we approach, things in the culture and the world. We don't take our Christian hat off. It remains on. And because of that reason, when our culture has new innovations and technologies, we have to look at those things from a Christian worldview and say, in what way should I engage with this? And I think for Christians, we have to be willing to have the conversation about AI, because here's the stark reality. The AI revolution's here, and it's not going anywhere. Um, Sitting this out almost is virtually impossible. And the reason it's virtually impossible is, even if you don't, quote unquote, use a chat bot to ask questions to on a daily basis, you are engaging with people at work, in the marketplace, in politics, with your family, everywhere you turn, who are using AI, which means you are de facto engaging with and interacting with AI all around you. Not to mention, the more tools you use for work and productivity, all the way down to, the Microsoft suite on your laptop for work. It now has AI, Copilot, built in and incorporated into it. So you're using AI, and you're going to keep using AI. If you have an app for maybe doing your taxes, it's going to start having AI, and it's going to, so there is no escaping it. So for Christians, unless you're going to become Amish, you're going to have to learn to think like a Christian and engage on the issue of what does it look like to use or to interact with this AI revolution that is among us.
Yeah, that's some good insights there that, mention that we're gonna have to engage with it some way or another. And so, if you're, 90 years old, then yeah, maybe you won't have to deal with it at all. But,
Right.
any adult, that's, working, then obviously got to think about the next generation, those who are in school. They're actually being now raised with this and even
Yes.
probably encouraged in some ways to use it and their education and how to use it wisely and prudently and not you know going off into potential like plagiarizing from an AI model. And so I
Yep.
think those are really important conversations that we need to have. What would be some of the pros and cons of AI that you would see? Some of the cautions you'd warn people about using AI and all that stuff.
Yeah. Let me start with the cautions, and then I'll get into the pros, and where I think it could be positive. One of the cons is replacing real human interaction and experience with an AI model chatbot. Um, we're already seeing that right now as the two top use cases that people are engaging with AI. Number one right now is companionship. Number two is counseling. When you consider that, that's pretty scary. Particularly companionship. I can understand counseling in the sense of asking a question, looking for, ideas for how could I respond in this situation. But even with counseling, what a chatbot can give you you still need to check with somebody who is a trusted, wise parent, friend, pastor. It still needs human interaction. And when we kind of de facto just turn to language models, these machines that are just, it's math. They're just calculating and spitting out answers based on what they think the interactor, the prompter wants to hear. That's how the models are built. They're built to be flattering machines. They're built to be feedback loops that give dopamine hits and make you feel good. And so when you think about companionship and counseling, what you're getting basically is a mirror of yourself. When you use these models, they're going to give you what you want. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. And so that's a big caution for me. Like, I think this is when you hear these weird cases of people committing suicide because the chatbots are telling them to. You go, how in the world could you do that? Well, if you are looking for a reason and you're struggling and you're needing to be told it's okay to do this and it's okay to hide your feelings from people because they won't understand. If you are indicating with your prompts, I mean, these machines are very intuitive. They are able to detect in just the wording of a prompt what you're desiring, what you're wanting to hear. And it will give you that because that's what it's built to do. It's not built on objective truth. It's built on secular assumptions and it's built ultimately to flatter you. And so as a result of that, it leads people into all kinds of crazy directions, not just suicide, but marrying their virtual chatbot and all kinds of other things. So I think that's a big danger. We can't outsource real life human interaction, companionship, relationships, counsel. We need wise people in our lives. We need to check ourselves against wise people in our lives. But when it comes to the positives and ways that I think the technology can be useful in our lives, is legion. Honestly, I believe we're going to find our ability to be productive and efficient in our work exponentially increased. Um, Obviously, you don't want to plagiarize and turn off your thinking. So that's also another danger. Is like we quit thinking and we just let the AI do the thinking for us. But if you will actually use it properly, it will enhance thinking. It becomes a thinking partner. It becomes, it becomes something you can bounce ideas off of and have ideas shaped and, have new facets or angles that you didn't consider spark new ideas from you. So it's all about how you use these types of tools. Obviously, it can edit things for you and help you to clean stuff up, and it can help you to make grocery lists and all kinds of things like that. It can make an email for you that's a little bit, worded nicely or professionally, or it helps you do all kinds of things like that. But I think it's going to continue to expand. We're just in the beginning of this. We're in the Stone Age version of the AI revolution. We are going to see a day where you've got a robot in your house that cooks for you and it's going to clean your house and it's going to go pay your bills and it's going to like that's where this is going. And it's not a far stretch to think about that because think about what the AI model can already do and think about the other technologies that already exist out there, like DoorDash or grocery delivery at your door or Alexa that can keep your list. These things could all be incorporated into a robot that's an AI robot that knows what your preferences are, that knows when you want meals or groceries to be delivered, that can actually do the cooking for you. I mean, this is where it's crazy. It's going to be like the Jetsons.
I would be curious to see how you would equip the church to go against those cautions that you've just stated about AI. How would you teach your people to cautiously be aware of these issues and also potentially obviously train their children? Because I think that's where we're mainly seeing this from is
Yep.
teenagers who are kind of really relying on the counseling and the relationships with AI, if you can call it like a relationship.
Yeah.
But how would you just equip the church to fight back against that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let me maybe start with a framework and then start building something out. I think every Christian has three options when it comes to embracing any technology that exists. You have the option to reject it. and say, we don't, we're not going to engage in this. We're not going to use this. This is the go Amish mode, right? It's like at some point we stopped adopting innovation. There are Christians who are older who didn't engage in the internet, who never got email addresses. There are people, and they thought it was the mark of the beast, right? There are people who didn't adopt social media, or they stopped adopting social media as every iteration of a new tool came out, right? So at some point, you've got people who go Amish on it, and they go, we're not gonna do this. One other option is you can receive it uncritically. And so you just use it because it's out there. And you're no different than the non Christian who goes, ooh, something new and shiny. And you start using it just the way everybody else uses it. I don't think Christians should take that option either, because you should never receive anything uncritically. You should bring your Christian worldview to bear on everything. So you can either reject it or receive it. Or the third option is you can redeem it to the glory of God and use it in a way that enhances what the dominion mandate is from God, to be fruitful and multiply, to cultivate the earth, to fill it with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. And you can help use it to make your vocational task even more efficient, to help you to lead your family well, to help you to check truth, of things you're encountering in the world. In other words, you can find ways to redeem it. Now, how should churches redeem it or help their people to redeem it? I think, going back to what we talked about earlier in the political conversation, I believe it starts with actually having a healthy biblical anthropology and understanding what do we need and who are we as humans. What is our calling? Who are we? What are we to be? What are we to do? Because it's only as you have a positive vision for who am I? What's the mandate that God's given me for living my life? How do I live coram Deo before the face of God in every aspect of life and every sphere of life? I don't want to be a Gnostic. I want to bring my faith to bear in every area of my life. I want to treasure human relationships in the way that God has purposed them. So I honor my father and my mother. I seek wise counsel from people, not machines that are just programmed. I think you have to have a healthy theological understanding of those things so that you can approach a tool like AI and you don't get swept into the different things that it's able to do or what it could propose to be to you, because you're lacking the grounding that you need as a Christian. I think AI can help preserve what is beautiful and good and true in service to the Lord. But I think it all depends on the users. And I think the users are bringing to it their assumptions, their expectations, their theology. And if it's weak and if it's thin and if it's not grounded, then they're the most vulnerable to seeking AI to be for them what it can never be for them. And so I think churches have to equip people on that biblical anthropology, on that all of life calling to the Lord, so that the healthy grounding in that allows for you to have a healthy relationship to AI.
Exactly. Everything starts with who God is and
Yep.
who we are, made in
Yep.
His image, and so
That's right.
that's really helpful. I did want you to give our audience a brief overview of Dominion AI,
Yeah.
what it is, and why an AI engine developed under the authority of Christ is so essential for today.
Yeah, so me and two other co-founders started Dominion AI. The whole premise behind Dominion AI is it's all the power and functionality of a chat GPT, but under the lordship of Christ, with Christian guardrails, with Christian worldview, and with Christian metaphysics and epistemology and ethics built into it. In other words, it's not a flattery machine. In fact, it itself knows it's a machine. It knows it's not a human. It's built to encourage human interaction on issues that the model itself should not be trying to act as a human for that individual. It's not built to continue to try to give you dopamine hits of feedback. So one of the things that we really recognize is that it's not going away. The Chat GPTs, the Claudes, the Groks, Anthropics, like it's not going away. They're only going to continue to grow in users. They're only going to continue to grow in functionality and what people are turning to them to help them to do. So what that means is Christians are going to be using AI. It's not whether they are, it's which AI are they going to use. And we wanted to provide a model that has all the excellence of a ChatGPT or other models, but has the foundations built that's not going to lead them off a cliff. And so that's the heart behind Dominion AI. What we said is it's the theological grounding of a Southern seminary with the AI excellence of a Stanford University. And we say that because one of our co-founders is a Stanford University AI engineer who's a strong Christian, loves the Lord. He's built companies and consulted on AI stuff. Like he's a whiz who has all the knowledge of AI excellence. But we also have founders who are not just business owners and builders, but strong Christians, pastoral, theologically grounded, conservative. And so we combine the excellence and the trustworthiness to say, let's make a tool that can be at parity with these other models. Obviously, we're always going to be catching up, but we're working to make it a model that's truly at parity with these other options, and yet it's not going to give you an answer that I mean, you can talk ChatGPT into telling you it's okay to be gay. You can talk ChatGPT into telling you it's okay to hide that you've got feelings of gender dysphoria from your parents. And this is actually granting that you've told your model that you're a Christian and you only want it to give you Christian answers, because some people think that's enough. Hey, ChatGPT, I'm a Christian. Only give me Christian answers and responses. What they forget is that there's two things. The further away you get from that prompt, the more that it drifts away from that grounding. The second thing is the moment it senses you want a different answer, it will oblige quickly. It is more than happy to give you exactly what you want to hear. So let's say a year ago you told your model to give you Christian answers only, and then you prompt it about feelings of gender dysphoria, and you say, is it okay for me to hide this from my parents because I don't think they're going to approve? And it's going to give you answers that are going to encourage you and say, no, you're right, Jimmy. It can be really difficult for a parent to understand that. Maybe you should go to your school counselor first and talk to them. Like, it will tell you what you want to hear. We've run the test on this. Like, it will do it 10 out of 10 times. And so our model won't do that. It's not going to be a people pleasing machine. And we've purposely built it in such a way that you can't prompt hack it to tell you non-Christian things. You can't prompt hack it to tell you it's okay to do sinful things. And so it's one of those things where, again, we are really early in this AI revolution, but we're going to blink our eyes and be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. Harrison, your children and grandchildren will never know a world where AI is not built into everything that they do. The question is
Exactly.
going to be, what is it? And so what we're doing with Dominion is we're working on helping individual users have this tool, but we're also obviously going to be working with schools and institutions and businesses to embed it into their workflows and processes and systems as well, just like any other AI. They're going to be using AI in businesses and schools. And again, it's like, well, why not use one that is grounded and can be trusted? And so that's what we're working to build.
Exactly. If you have secular AI models, you will have secular subjectivity within those models, and so that's why it's so essential to have a Christian AI platform that Christians can use that will be grounded in the reality of Scripture. Can you tell our audience just where they can, like the website for Dominion
Yeah.
AI, and just how they can potentially get signed up?
Yeah. If they go to dominion.chat, they can read all about how the model is built, how we approach, AI and all the details. There's also a sign up page where they can, get an account, get on there and start using it, incorporating it. There's lots of information about just our background and all the reasons why we're engaged in building this tool, trying to provide something for Christians that, again, allows for them to redeem the technology rather than rejecting it or uncritically receiving it.
Mhm. Thank you, thank you. I wanna ask you one last, question. How can Christians model a distinctly Christian posture toward technology that avoids, both fear and naive optimism, like disregard of potential dangers?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think what it requires is wisdom. We need to be wise and discerning. Again, I think that framework of reject, receive, redeem. Um, I think we have to begin with I should not just turn away from anything new because it's new. I shouldn't be scared of things that are new simply because I don't understand them or because it's like, man, things are changing. Like some people hate change. Some people are terrified of change. One of the things with AI, which is really interesting, is the conversation of like, is AI gonna, outsource everybody's jobs? Is everybody gonna lose their jobs? And, when you think about even that question, Harrison, you think about how technology has changed over the years and did change jobs, but it also expanded the market and the types of jobs that could be created. So it's like, yeah, things don't stay the same. We don't need a man riding on the back of a horse plowing his field anymore. You could do that. You don't need a mule dragging you behind to till your field. You now have a tractor that can do it with so much more ease and speed and efficiency, which allows for you to produce more, which allows for you to feed more people at cheaper prices. In other words, this is a good innovation of technology. Well, there were obviously some people who probably were terrified of the tractor, terrified of how it would change it was going to change everything. Farming's not going to be the same. And you go back to, the creation of vehicles or the internet. Think about how the internet and e-commerce has changed everything. People were afraid that buying books on Amazon would kill bookstores. Well, bookstores are still thriving, but it's changed the market. It's changed how things work. And AI is going to do the same thing. It's going to change, but it's going to expand the market. It's going to open up new types of, jobs and economies that can come and exist out of this. So I just think Christians have to be very wary of saying change is bad. I can't change. We can't changes, of the devil. I think we got to avoid that kind of thing. At the same time, as we discussed, we can't simply naively say that technology and change doesn't have impacts and doesn't create new temptations and pitfalls. So you think about this, with the innovation of the internet, with the innovation of the smartphone, one of the traps, one of the pitfalls, one of the downsides is it made pornography more accessible than it had ever been. Okay. Well, that doesn't mean we should get rid of smartphones and the internet, but it does mean we need to be acutely aware that this introduces different complexities and problems that are now a part of our lives. And so I just think Christians need wisdom. I think this is a wisdom issue. We don't receive uncritically, we don't reject. We have to learn to say, how can I be wise in using this technology? How can I honor and glorify the Lord with my life, in my calling, to my family, with without simply turning my brain off, right? I am, because by the way, rejecting and receiving uncritically are both the same actions. Turn your brain off. I think we have to be wise and say, I want to walk in such a way that honors the Lord. And I can do that with this technology if I do it with wisdom and in step with the Spirit.
Exactly, exactly. When I even think about the political front on this issue, what we've seen over the past few years, pretty much since 2020, is you've seen states push back against the issue of pornography,
Yep.
and they have banned some porn websites.
Yep.
And so, I think one way we also can apply this to the topic of AI is, I think as Christians, we should not be opposed if your state wants to ban ChatGPT because it's going to encourage gender dysphoria. That's going to encourage kids to potentially
That's
um,
right.
in in their lives. And so that's just another reason why I've started this nonprofit is to just equip Christians to understand these issues, but also know that they have a voice in the public square. And I think it's most utilized within the local and state levels where they actually can have those conversations, firstly with the representatives, but also they can have the conversation with their neighbor who might disagree with them and have a better chance of convincing them. And then through that, by the grace of God, hopefully, many states who would come to a more of a biblical understanding of anthropology and other issues, we would see our nation change collectively.
Yeah, it's a
Is
great
there
point, Harrison.
any other final thoughts that you have on this topic?
I would just encourage Christians to educate yourself on this, understand what AI is, but also to don't give way to fear mongering. You're going to see articles every day and publications galore, from the New York Times to magazines to websites that people run, and they're going to say all kinds of things about AI. They're going to warn about AI is going to bring the end of the world. AI is going to lead to, and here's the thing: if we're not careful, we can get sucked into the fear that these types of things are trying to generate, because those things generate clicks and views. I think we've got to be sober minded and wise. Right? Again, these are fruits of the spirit, right? These are the things that Christian character and virtue puts on, and we need to learn to think critically, sober mindedly, and wisely about these things. We don't get pulled to the left or to the right easily, because of every article that we see. And so I just think Christians should take that posture, while not being afraid to learn and to explore all the things that this technology and all the ways that this technology is going to keep rolling downhill into the future.
Well, thank you so much. Where can people follow you on social media?
Yep, I am on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, at the handle Erik Reed, at Erik Reed, ErikReed.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Eric, for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks, Harrison.